South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, have hailed the Russia-Africa summit a success. This week, Moscow hosted a cohort of African leaders in St. Petersburg to discuss progressive relations. President Ramaphosa is said to have re-emphasized to Putin that the continent is committed to continuous negotiations for peace between the two nations, and he's expressed a sentiment with Russia considering the previous proposals by the delegation which went on a peace mission a month ago. Let's get some analysis on this. We speak to conflict resolution expert Dr. Kingsley Makhubela. A very good morning to you, Dr. Makhubela. Thank you so much for your time. The summit has come to an end, and of course President Cyril Ramaphosa expressing some sort of satisfaction that what they've put forward in terms of the peace plan when it comes to ending the war will be heard and digested by Vladimir Putin. What do you make of the summit and how some of the topics in discussion were handled?
Good morning. The importance of the summit is that the power play around the global community has basically changed. It has entrenched, to a large extent, the belief in multilateralism and multilateral polar powers. But you would see, what is going on here is that the power is used in different ways. The West has traditionally used the power that says, you do what I want, or I will do what you don't want. So the Russians, the Chinese, and other powerhouses have taken a total different approach that says, you do what I want, and I'll do what you want. And there are concessions in terms of those negotiations. How do they exchange these concessions around economic development, global situation? I think that's the importance of what came out of this summit in Moscow. It has entrenched this multipolar approach. Having said that, the progress with respect to what emerged out of this conference is something that we need to track between now and the next summit, so that you just don't have summits to have discussions and very nice discussions and leave. You come up with concrete results. And I think that's where it stands. With respect to the conflict that is going on in Ukraine, I think it's still naive of the African Union and South Africa in particular to think that we can mediate that conflict when the powers that are involved behind this conflict, that are spending and really supporting this conflict, are not buying into this settlement of the conflict peacefully.
In fact, as you say that, some of the commentators who've been speaking are saying that Putin is offering an unconvincing giveaway in a desperate bid to make up for killing the Ukraine grain deal. I mean, what came out of it is Russia speaking about how they're going to offer free grain to 6 African nations, and also at the same time, all of this happens nearly a week after Russia withdrew from an agreement to allow Ukraine to export its products across the Black Sea.
You know, the Russians are too smart. They realize that the other party is not willing for a peaceful negotiation. So they are stating all these issues to try to gain an upper hand, and rightfully so. If I was in their position, I would do the same. There's no way that Russia would, in the long run, keep on producing grain and giving it free around the world, because producing that grain, it requires a lot of resources and so on. In the long run, it's not sustainable. But it's because of this conflict that is going on and the impasse that is there that the Russians are actually appearing to be very smart in their approach as compared to the Ukrainian. You will know that a lot of grain that came from the Ukraine, a large part of it never even ended in the African continent.
Yes.
Within the UN system of grain trade, it ended up in Europe. I mean, it was quite disgusting at one stage to realize that this grain is used to feed pigs in Spain when people are starving around the world. So that's what is going on. You're going to see this posturing and so on moving forward.
So what's essentially the catch? Is Russia just trying to woo African leaders because, it may have a broader plan to influence across the global south as, you know, the international community is sort of snubbing Russia and not bothered?
You know, the global system it's in some form of paralysis, particularly the United Nations system. The Security Council, whose mandate is the maintenance of global peace and security, is in paralysis. And now a debate is moving to the General Assembly. And in the General Assembly, it's a game of numbers. And I think Africans are required to vote. You would have seen in the last few months how Africans have been lobbied to vote against Russia and so on. So that's what is going on. The Russians are quite aware about this approach, and that's why they are using their own soft power influence to try to woo the Africans not to vote against them in the West. But all these things are happening at a time when the world is changing. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is taking a center stage as a platform for global development and so on. And the West is quite worried. I mean, I read an article the other day that Americans are quite worried about losing their own power. And they are doing whatever it takes to cling to this global power that they are having. But the world is really changing, Mpo.
What about the impact on geopolitical tensions, perhaps on African countries as all of this happens?
You know, that's why I'm saying both use of power, the cohesive use of power and the soft use of power, they all have their own implications. Of course, the fact that Africa, particularly in West Africa, we've seen a lot of military upheavals in the recent past. And the opinion that you do what I want and I'll do what you want has its own ramification in the process. Because the Russians, as you can see, they've been interacting. I think they are even providing to start training some of these people around the continent. So that's where the challenge is. Of course, the West has been doing the same thing. I mean, if you look at what happened in Niger recently, those military units in Niger were trained by the Americans. And Americans have been raising this concerns about training them. Even before the emergence of the coup, they've been hearing in the House about how the Americans trained all these people who are engaging in coups in West Africa. So all these things, they have their own ramification. And I'm saying at this time, the Africans, as Africans, there's a need to start defining our own destiny outside these paradigms that are emerging or that have consistently dominated the space.
And that's why perhaps President Ramaphosa is saying Africa must pursue independent foreign policies and not, you know, pander to global powers and global blocs.
Independent foreign policy requires certain instruments back at home. You need to establish systems that are really durable, systems that are really consistent, systems that can stand any turbulence around the world. We don't have that. And as long as we don't have that, you look at the debt that we are having as South Africa, our debt is so huge that those who are actually lending us money are going to dictate terms. That's how it works. It has worked like that in the past. So we can't be speaking about independent foreign policy when we run to these countries with a begging bowl asking for money for basics that we could do. I mean, look at ourselves here, how we decimating the infrastructure with respect to agriculture. It's becoming very expensive for farmers to keep on really investing in the sector because the road infrastructure to transport their produce, even selling their produce, is becoming a challenge. So we're going to face a food security as we move forward. So we cannot really look at the Ukrainian grain and Russian grain as a silver bullet. It's basically to look at how do we reinvigorate our own systems within the country. And it seems there's no understanding, there's no discussion around those issues. Even here, it's worse around the continent. But here at home, it's a big problem. Yes. There are areas with good, for instance, take the southern Angola, part of the southern Sudan, which actually can become a breadbasket for the continent. But these areas are involved in some form of conflict, latent, overt conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time and a very thorough analysis. Conflict resolution expert, Dr. Kingsley Makhubela.